afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriela Giron, and today I'm going to be talking to you about sibling dynamics, disabilities, and literature. So, I would like to preface by saying that I will be using the term mentally retarded in this during this project just because of the context of the presentation. The term mental retardation was used medically up until 2013, so it is seen widely throughout literature, media, and other things. So that being said, when starting this research, I came across a lot of critically acclaimed books, mainly Newbery Award winners, which is for children's books, that highlighted a relationship between a non-disabled sibling and a sibling with a mental disability. And these are just some examples from the 3 books that I'm going to be talking about today that use the word retarded. It's used over and over and over, whether it's used medically or in an insulting way. And so that led me to develop my research question of how does children's literature from the 60s to the 80s portray the shifting depictions of people with cognitive disabilities as illustrated through sibling dynamics. So, to answer this question, I wanted to look first into some changes in laws as well. So the first book was published in 1959 as a short story. Flowers for Algernon initially was a short story, and then later on in 1966, it was expanded into a novel by the author. And around this time, there had not been many laws regarding people with disabilities. Oftentimes, when parents went to the doctors with concern about their children, the doctors would tell them that the best place to put their child would be in a mental institution and just leave them away from their families, from anyone else. And so oftentimes, people with disabilities were isolated. It wasn't until 1966 that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed, and this is around the time that President John F. Kennedy, sorry, I forgot my president, President John F. Kennedy, he kickstarted funding for research into people with disabilities. And so after his death, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed an amendment into the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which basically provided funding for schools for special education and to have classrooms for special education. Shortly after that, The Summer of the Swans was published in 1970, and I want to point out that by this time, schools still had the ability to turn children with disabilities away from their schools, so only 1 in 5 children with disabilities were being educated in the United States in a public school. That all changed with the Revolutionary Education of All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which essentially guaranteed children with disabilities the right to a free and public school education in the United States. So by this point, students were starting to be mainstreamed into media, so that it was an easier shift into the school environment. And a little bit over or a decade after that, Sweet Whispers Brother Rush was published, and yeah. Sure. Around the late 1980s, scholars did studies on the sibling dynamics between disabled and non-disabled siblings, which essentially showed that children that grow up in a household with a mentally disabled sibling tend to be a lot more empathetic and are less likely to express negative behavior, and they tend to have more harmonious relationships with their siblings. So oftentimes, these children tend to be a lot more empathetic. They are more understanding and more patient with their siblings, which translates to outside of their household, translates to school, and just in general. And in addition to that, scholars also studied disabled characters in children's and young adult literature, which essentially showed that before the 1975 Act, many of these children's novels used stereotypical language, whereas after the 1975 Act, they had more accurate portrayals of children with disabilities, which essentially included the bullying that they underwent and any abuse and stuff like that. And they also found that literature, when it's used with accurate portrayals of children with disabilities, can be used as an outlet to foster empathy. So, the 3 works that I looked at are Flowers for Algernon, The Summer of the Swans, and Sweet Whispers Brother Rush. So, Flowers for Algernon essentially follows the story of Charlie, who has an intellectual disability, and he has the opportunity to essentially undergo a procedure that will enhance his intellectual capabilities. And after he undergoes this, he starts remembering memories from his childhood, where essentially he remembered that his sister used to be very mean to him. She would bully him more than people in school would bully him, and she was essentially the reason that he was sent into an institution, which was where he grew up. And so it was because of her that he was ostracized and had to grow up alone. And then in The Summer of the Swans follows the story of Sarah and her younger brother Charlie, who essentially Charlie one day he goes out at night, he's looking for swans and he gets lost. And so Sarah kind of gets her protective sister Giron, and she kind of goes out and kind of forces everybody to also look for Charlie. She makes everybody like care about this, that it's important that we need to find my brother because he can't be out all alone because of his disability. He needs to have someone there with him. So she understands that because of his disability, it's a lot more difficult for him to process that he's lost in the first place. So it shows a lot of protectiveness. And in Sweet Whisper's Brother Rush follows the story of Tree and her older brother Dabney, who has a cognitive disability. And essentially these two siblings can have the ability to see the ghost of their dead uncle, who shows them through a mirror their past, their family's past. And so through this mirror, Tree is able to see the abuse that her brother underwent at the hands of his mother, who essentially she would tie him to the bedpost so he couldn't move, she wouldn't feed him and stuff like that. And so she essentially forces, after knowing this, she confronts her mother and forces her to take accountability for the things that she did to her brother. So obviously the sibling relationships in all three of these novels are very different from each other. So in Flowers for Algernon, it has a big theme of ostracization, which is reflective of the time period. Like I said, around this time, there wasn't much research done, so people didn't really understand people with disabilities. They would just kind of throw them outside and be like, we don't have to worry about you, which is shown in the novel, where essentially Norma and Charlie's parents threw Charlie into an institution to try to give Norma a normal life so that she wouldn't have to be bullied because of her brother, and so she wouldn't have to deal with him. As well as he had this idea that he needed to be just like everybody else in order to be accepted, and that because of his disability, he was never going to be able to form actual friendships or have any relationship with anybody. This shifts in The Summer of the Swans, which shows a bigger theme of protectiveness within the sibling dynamic. So Sarah, rather than just calling it a day and be like, oh no, Charlie got lost, so well, too bad, so sad, she goes out and takes it upon herself to have the entire neighborhood look for Charlie and make sure that everybody cares about this. And essentially, she takes on a very protective role. She does not let other people pick on her brother, and if she thinks anyone is being mean to him, she will literally attack them, like assault them, verbally, not physically. But she's very protective over her brother, which essentially reflects that time period where there was starting to be more changes in civil rights. People were starting to care more about the situation, and they started to realize we need to protect these people, we need to take care of them, they're people too. And then we have a Sweet Whisper's Brother Rush, which shows a big theme of accountability. In the novel, when Tree learns of the things that her mother did to her brother, she forces her to take accountability for her actions. She tells her it's essentially your fault. I'm gonna spoil this, sorry guys, but Dabney dies in the end of a different situation. But Tree essentially tells her mother that it's her fault that Dabney died because she abandoned them so much that she literally she never took them to the doctor, never did anything with them. And so she didn't know that Charlie had this, he had a disease that was eventually gonna kill him. And so because of this ignorance, Dabney died. So that's what she was getting at. And essentially she forced her mother to take accountability, which is reflective of the time period that around this time, this was after the changes in laws. So people were starting to realize that they needed to understand their past, and they needed to understand everything that they put these people through the ostracization, through the schools, turning away children from getting an education, that they needed to come to terms with that and take accountability for these so that they could move on towards a more inclusive future. So all three of the novels portray the siblings dynamic differently, which are reflective of the mainstreaming that was happening throughout the late 20th century. And essentially, with Flowers for Algernon reflects the ostracization, The Summer of the Swans reflects the protectiveness, and The Sweet Whispers of the Rush reflects the accountability. And so further research, since all of these novels are critically acclaimed, all of them are used in schools, 2 of them were turned into movies, and 2 of them are Newbery Award winners, future scholars could look at how how societal shifts can impact the significance and the reliability of these novels. Thank you.